Did you have a chance to look through the brochure I left on your desk this morning? Kevin asked. He was in the kitchen washing the dishes from dinner, looking at me expectantly as I lounged on the couch. I can get us a few complimentary tickets for their dress rehearsals tomorrow night. These kinds of haunted houses cost hundreds of dollars per ticket. It's an over-the-top experience. I haven't looked at it yet, babe. I lied. He had woken me up before he left for the office this morning, and told me to read over the little pamphlet when I had a break from work. After writing 2,000 mind-numbing words on the best places to rent sound equipment in Nashville, I needed to step away. The glossy pamphlet by my keyboard had been sitting there through the afternoon, so I picked it up and looked it over. Music City Madness, a Nashville nightmare, was written across the top in a sharp, craggy font that reminded me of the old Tales from the Crypt comic books my father had passed along to me as a child. An illustrated cowboy, skin rotting and country western attire covered in dirt, pointed two decaying hands in a finger gun motion from the page. It was whimsical and cheesy. Just the kind of thing Kevin knew I would love. Or at least I used to. Cat, Kevin said, tossing the wet dish towel on the kitchen counter. You haven't left the house in 2 months. I know you're worried, but Bruce, Angie, and Andre are going with us. You're going to be surrounded by friends, and we'll have the entire place to ourselves. Bruce will drive us directly from the apartment, and we can be right back when we're done. No one is going to be able to hurt you. I want to, I said, then paused for a moment. You've been supportive through all this, and you'll never know what it means to me, but I just hate thinking that guy might be watching me. 6 months ago, I started getting letters at my office with no return address. They started out simple enough. There would be a photocopy of some industry article I had written. In the top left corner of each, the sender had drawn a heart in red marker around my headshot. I thought it was Kevin or one of my friends attempting some stupid practical joke, but they all denied it. It didn't take long before I knew it wasn't them. When the fifth letter arrived, it held the usual article, but that time there was no heart around my headshot. Instead, they had drawn X's over my eyes, so deeply it nearly ripped through the page. A red line ran across my neck, and tiny cartoon blood drops trailed down the entire left-hand side into a comically large pool of blood. Another arrived the next week, my picture surrounded by red and yellow flames. My facial features were replaced with a pencil drawing of a skull. In the lower left-hand corner was a drawing of a dark blue Prius, also covered in flames. The tiny caricature was a near-perfect replica of my car, with my license plate number clearly visible. I took the letters to my editor, and she was nearly as mortified as I was. We called the Nashville Metro Police, who took the letters into evidence. After a few days of anxious waiting, a detective called to tell me there was no discernible DNA or fingerprints available to use as evidence. They would write a report to keep on file, but with nothing usable, there was nothing to do but wait for something else to happen. A few weeks went by with no new letters, and I started to wipe them from my mind. I moved in with Kevin after the police truck had no luck finding out who had been sending the letters, but had forgotten to stop the mail from going to my old apartment. My old superintendent had texted me to tell me he had left some mail for me in his office. It had been an uneventful message, all except for the last line. I'm sorry for your loss. I arrived at my old apartment after dark. The lights in the super's office were off and the door was shut. Out of politeness, I knocked a few times before trying the doorknob and finding it unlocked. Moonlight was filtering in through the thin curtains on the window. A large silhouette of flowers outlined on his desk. Flipping on the light, I let out a startled shriek. There was a large funeral arrangement. Red roses draped in baby's breath, framing yellow roses spelling out R.I.P. Approaching the flowers, I could see a card wrapped in an envelope taped to the wicker basket. Opening it, I read, "Deepest sympathies for your impending loss, Catherine." I ran from the room, slammed the door shut, and ran to my car. Once I was inside, with the doors locked, I called 911 and waited for him below the glowing streetlight. The detective came and took the flowers into evidence. We talked for a half hour or so, him asking questions I couldn't answer. There was little to no assistance I could provide them. The investigation didn't go any better. When they spoke with the florist, they reported the order had come in from a website. It had been paid for with a prepaid Visa card. which had in turn been paid for with cash at a small mom-and-pop shop in Franklin, Tennessee. There was no video footage of the buyer, and the clerk had no recollection of who had purchased it. After that day, I didn't leave the apartment anymore. My boss allowed me to work remotely. I ordered DoorDash for most of my meals while Kevin was away. He did most of the grocery shopping, and whatever he didn't finish, the Kroger down the street delivered. All of my bills were automatically deducted from my checking account. I even began to see a therapist using the BetterHelp application. Aside from Kevin, I didn't see anyone. We watched movies on the couch every night, and he would cook me dinner while I worked. "I'm not forcing you to go," Kevin said, breaking my long train of thought. "It's just, you used to love all this spooky shit, and this place is supposed to be as realistic as you could get without being in a damn Saw movie." "Let's go," I said hesitantly. "I need to get out, and this will be fun. Just the 5 of us, right?" "Just the 5 of us," Kevin said, kissing me on top of the head. For a moment, I felt happy. Almost normal. It had been weeks since I received any of those awful letters, and it seemed like it could be all behind me. "How the hell did you manage to get tickets to this thing?" Andre asked Kevin excitedly as we drove through downtown Nashville. "I've seen advertisements for it everywhere. The tickets are outrageous." "I've been doing a little public relations work for the company that's hosting it," he replied, Cheshire grin plastered on his face. "It's a wild setup. You gotta sign a waiver before they let you in, because the actors can actually touch you. They don't let in more than 10 people at a time, which is why the tickets cost a damn fortune." "Ooh," Angie crooned. "A boutique experience? Ooh, you're really moving up in the world, Kevin." Everyone laughed and chattered loudly while Bruce aimed his SUV down the wet road. It had been raining for hours, and usually the lively downtown streets were nearly barren. You could see throngs of people through the windows into the bars and dance clubs, but the usual clusters of drunken tourists and waitresses taking a cigarette break were gone. I usually hated waiting as people walked against the crosswalk signs, but the city was unsettling without them. "Where are we going, Chief?" Bruce asked, glancing over his shoulder briefly. "This is good weather for ducks, but I'm not really looking to hoof it through a downpour." "There should be a parking garage across the street from the haunted house," Kevin replied, fishing a yellow slip of paper from his jacket and handing it to Andre in the passenger seat. "There's the parking pass they gave me. Just give it to the attendant when we pull in." I kept my nose buried in my phone for most of the drive. My stomach had been in knots since we left the apartment, and I probably would have run back inside if Kevin hadn't kept a reassuring hand on my back when Bruce stopped to pick us up. Everyone greeted me excitedly, and I returned their enthusiasm. But I couldn't kick the feeling that I brought a cloud of uneasiness to the group. We had talked for most of the trip, but everyone was noticeably careful, not to mention it was the first trip out of the apartment I had taken in nearly 2 months. Bruce pulled into the mouth of a well-lit parking garage and unrolled his window, handing the parking form to the attendant. He waved us through, and we went under the arm barrier as it switched from red to green. The garage was nearly empty, aside from a half-dozen cars parked on the entry level, probably belonging to the actors in the haunted house. "Let's get a move on," Kevin said, sliding from the back seat and giving me his hand to help me out. The sound of a woman screaming made me jump, and I scrambled back into the SUV. Kevin leaned inside and put a hand on my leg. "It's a speaker playing sound effects across the street, Kat. Everything's okay." "I don't know," I muttered, eyes downcast. "I'm not sure I can do this." "We can go home if you want," he said with a smile. "I don't know why the hell I thought this would be a good idea." "You thought it was a good idea because I love all this spooky shit," I said, returning a sheepish smile. Pushing myself off the seat, I climbed out and took his hand. "Let's go. It's gonna be fun. And you've been cooped up with me for too long." We fell in with the other 3 and walked down the sloping floor of the garage. A red brick building came into view as we reached the exit. 3 stories tall and peppered with frosted glass windows, the warehouse had once been used by a local brewery, until it had gone out of business a few years ago. Some enterprising real estate developer had gutted it and turned it into an event center that saw pretty frequent use. My mind boggled at how much renting it out for the entire month of October must have cost. Strobe lights erupted from inside the milky glass panels as eerie organ music drifted through the night air. 2 large speakers sat on the squat steps in front, filling the night with shrill noises, interlaced with the sound of screams, creaking doors, and heavy footsteps. It had frightened me only moments before, But as I looked at it, I was filled with the same sense of excitement I felt when I used to go to haunted houses with my friends as a teenager. "We moving?" asked Bruce. "Rain seems to be picking up, and I want to get inside before it gets any worse." Angie grabbed my hand and pulled me with her, running through the cold night rain and laughing. I could hear the three men running behind us as we bounded up the stairs and pulled the heavy wooden door open. We stepped inside the dimly lit entryway and marveled at the amazing decorations. Each wall was covered in a deep oak wainscoting, the designs intricate and covered in heavily framed oil paintings. Stately portraits filled each one, and their eyes locked on you the moment you entered the door. Fog covered the floor, nearly reaching my knee, swirling from our movements. A great chandelier dangled from the ceiling, lopsided and covered in spiderwebs. Only a quarter of the bulbs worked, and those sputtered and darkened every few seconds. "Welcome," said a voice from the center of the room. An old man wearing a black pinstripe suit sat at an ancient mahogany desk near a set of double doors. His thin, white hair was slicked back, and his deep, sunken eyes were underscored with black shadowing. He looked like a funeral director, which was likely the point. The old man pointed at 5 wing-backed leather chairs to the side of the room, a clipboard resting on each seat. "Come and be seated. We need to make your final arrangements." "Oh shit," Andre exclaimed loudly. "Kevin, you beautiful bastard, this is awesome." "Quiet and be seated," the old man said loudly as we moved quickly to the leather chairs, grabbing the clipboards and sitting down. He pushed himself from the desk and walked on shaky legs to stand before us. "If you would be so kind, please carefully read the paperwork we have provided for you. When you pass through the doors behind me, you'll enter a world where things are no longer under your control. Once you've completed your requisite forms, place them on my desk, and I will escort you to the inner chambers. If you find our terms unagreeable, you're free to leave. Once you have passed through to the other side, there is no coming back." I waited for him to continue, but he only turned and walked to the set of double doors, standing beside it and staring blankly towards the opposite wall. Angie and Andre were whispering and giggling a few chairs down, but Bruce and Kevin were already busy reading over their waivers. I began to read mine, and it was roughly what Kevin had already explained to me. The actors in the haunted house were allowed to touch you, though it did state that any inappropriate contact should be reported to attending staff. Lighting would be minimal in places, and you needed to be able to duck and crawl if needed. There was a large paragraph warning that anyone with a pacemaker or suffering from a heart condition was not advised to participate in the attraction. It would take approximately 25 to 30 minutes to make it from the entry door to the exit, and parties of no more than 10 were allowed through at a time. Additionally, parties would only be allowed to enter the attraction after the previous party was 15 minutes or more through their visit. If at any time you felt unsafe or wanted to exit the attraction, turning on the flashlight of your cell phone would indicate to the nearest actor that you needed to be escorted to an exit. I signed quickly at the bottom, before I had a chance to turn chicken shit and ask Kevin to leave. Walking over to the desk, I put my waiver down and went to stand with the old man. He didn't acknowledge me, and I felt awkward waiting for the others to finish, sighing with relief when Kevin finished his and joined me. The others weren't far behind, and once we gathered together, the old man turned toward us and smiled. "It has been lovely meeting you all," he croaked. "If you would be so kind as to step through these doors, I do believe there are some ladies and gentlemen who will be most pleased to assist you to your final destination." He pushed open the double doors, and we stepped through into a hallway that was almost devoid of light. We waited for him to give us further instructions, but as we turned toward him, the doors closed, leaving us in total darkness. He laughed from the other side of the door, and we heard a deadbolt slide into place. "Well," Kevin said, "let's go check this thing out." Everyone always thinks they have the stomach for a haunted house. It's easy to say, really. Most don't get past the level of surface cheese or the playful PG appeal more suited to a children's corn maze or spooky walkthrough. I had been through my fair share of haunts in the past, but something about this one felt different. For starters, the ambience was on point. The hallway in which we stood stretched out in front of us until it was too dark to see, giving us no choice but to imagine what dwelled within. Ripped sheets hung from the ceiling and billowed before us like ghastly shades, while eerie sound effects played from well-obscured speakers. The sound was so clear, it was like it was broadcasting directly into our ears. The hair stood on the back of my neck, and the shaken feeling from the drive over started to fade away. I was so pulled into the environment, I jumped when Kevin grabbed my hand. "This looks insane already. You gonna be alright, Cat?" He whispered over the sound of artificial wind and trickling water. "Too late to back out now." I smiled, and he grinned. It seemed both of us were overdue for some fun and safe excitement. "Well, no time like the present. I guess we just start walking?" Bruce said, leading us. He stepped hesitantly, already anticipating the jump scare. Angie and Andre followed hand in hand, each of them raising their eyebrows as they waved past the first series of flowing sheets. I braced myself and followed, pulling Kevin behind me. Visibility dissipated quickly, and the further we went in, the louder the sound effects got. The soft thudding of footsteps behind you, only to look and see nothing. It was too dark to even see the door we came through. The acceleration of the wind through broken windows, and the startling crash of a lightning strike. An unseen cat growling in the shadows, and the slow drag of a knife on a whetstone. Each methodically made you anxious as you crossed the long hall, the lights dying until there was nothing but darkness. Kevin stayed close by as we trailed behind the others, each of us blindly tensing in preparation. The floorboards creaked beneath us, and suddenly footsteps started pounding in front of us. Angie let out a little squeal, and Andre muttered an "oh shit," and suddenly I felt the wind of someone brushing past me. I squeezed Kevin's hand, and he pulled me closer to him, our hushed whispers overlapping each other with the rush of adrenaline. "Oh shit, there was someone hiding there. Did you see them?" "No. Where'd they go? Now this is fucking scary. Are they following us? Oh my gosh, this is so exciting." Our group moved forward, inching into the creeping dark with unsettled breath. I heard the crunch of broken glass ahead, and Angie muttering a "what the fuck." A second later, I felt it under my shoes, the grating of glass shards turning to powder against the tile. It felt like actual glass, and provided the same nails on a chalkboard feeling. Immediately after the glass, there was something else on the floor, a wet, sticky substance that clung to the outer soles of my shoes like oil. Feeling it in the dark without seeing it made my skin crawl, and I heard Kevin shudder in disgust next to me. "What did we just step in? I don't know." There was the sound of a switch being thrown, and suddenly lights flashed above us. The world exploded into a multicolored glow as a staircase was illuminated before us, the U-shape entirely splattered in reflective blacklight paint. Spelled in crude lettering was a large and shining message. "Welcome to Hell." Before we could take it in, Angie shrieked and started backing away, leaving Bruce by himself at the landing as she pulled Andre with him. He looked back in surprise, and our eyes collectively trailed to the same spot on the floor, the cause of Angie's terror. A man was lying in a heap next to us, so close we almost stepped on him. His limbs were sprawled across the floor, the neon blue limbs of his jumpsuit frozen in place. His face was obscured, pressed flat to what looked like a collected pool of his own blood, presumably from the still dripping wound in his neck. Blood we were standing in. "What the fuck?" Andre said, shielding Angie, her teeth glowing brightly against the strange purple tint of her skin. "Looks so real," Bruce said, tiptoeing near the prop corpse. "Maybe it is," Kevin said, and I playfully nudged him. We all gawked in the ultraviolet light, taking in the set that colorfully popped while simultaneously not letting us see enough. It looked like a crime scene in a nightclub. "This is wild. I wonder how they made it look so lifelike," Angie said, reaching out with her foot to touch it. Andre tisked and stopped her. "Come on, we should keep moving. We won't have so much time before they let the next group in," Andre said. "I agree, let's get going," I said, not wanting to stay much longer. Something about the fake corpse and the light made my stomach turn, like it felt heavier in the obnoxious infrared. Bruce chuckled at the corpse and started up the steps, making a theatrical attempt to gesture at the message on the wall. Angie and Andre muttered it under their breath, wide-eyed at each other before bursting into laughter. When I went to follow, I felt Kevin resisting. I looked to see him gazing down the hallway, to the sheets floating in the abyss behind us. He was squinting a little, like he was staring at something in particular. "You coming, babe?" I asked, shaking his hand a little. Yeah, just looks like there's something watching us, he said before turning back to me. I think that's the point, I teased, and he laughed it off. All right, lead the way. By the time we made it to the top of the stairs, the black light had started to dwindle. Bruce, Angie, and Andre waited for us, standing awkwardly under a flickering fluorescent that buzzed above them. It seemed like nobody wanted to press on alone. Looking past them, I could see why. Beyond the struggling light was a red haze that faded in and out, casting a glow from a series of World War II-era lanterns that strung across the corridor. Through the ever-changing glimmer, it looked like we were in a hospital ward. Faint groans of agony could be heard, along with soft sobs that were played over the speakers. An old wooden sign was nailed to the wall, a blood-splatter font that indicated we had arrived at the trauma center. This is more like it, Bruce said, nodding his head in approval. A nod that paused when he looked to the right. The rooms on the right had been hollowed out, walls knocked down to make way for a large open space. It was hard to see where the bodies ended and the limbs began, a slowly climbing mountain of gore that stood about waist height. Hunched at the summit was someone slowly moving, a single light bulb illuminating them from above. Jesus, Bruce said under his breath, speaking for all of us as we took in the details. A bloody nurse was transfixed at her busy hands, her busty gown and provocative lingerie splattered from head to toe in blood. A single amputee lay across her lap, the shush-shush-shush of a hacksaw working back and forth as it worked through the remaining arm on the torso. Angie gasped, and the nurse paused, looking up at us from the guise of a soiled paper dust mask, one that conformed as she smiled. We should keep moving, Kevin said, his voice a mixture of excited and disturbed. Yeah, this is creepy as hell, no thank you, Andre agreed, pulling Angie away. But just as we started to walk away, the red glow ceased. Each light shut off at once, leaving us in the pitch-black hall. The air raid siren that followed sent chills up my spine. I squeezed Kevin's hand and felt him move closer, anticipating what was coming next. The seconds spent lingering in the dark felt like an eternity, and Kevin and I started to inch forward down the hall, blindly reaching in front of us to make sure we didn't hit a wall as we joined the others. We could hear the sounds of doors opening, a wooden creak followed by the heavy march of footsteps. Guys? I called, holding Kevin close. We hear you. We're up here. Sounds like something's coming. Angie's blood-curdling scream was sudden and startling, and I felt my whole body seize up as my flight response fought to take over. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. And in the darkness, the corridor felt suddenly suffocating. Hey, easy, Andre called. But he couldn't see, and Kevin was heading towards them, squeezing my hand and working his way forward blindly. Whoa, let go of me. Another scream, followed by a series of slamming doors. The strobe that followed was jarring, and a rapid blinking through the hallway back into view like a slideshow. The speakers blared recordings of agitated animals, like a feral cat backed into a corner, to a pack of dogs audibly gnashing sets of teeth. By the time the recording melted to a low baby cry, I realized something was wrong in the flashing images of the hallway ahead. Bruce, Andre, and Angie were gone. I looked at Kevin, at his returned look of bewilderment. His mouth was hanging open in disbelief, and I could see he was sweating. He was trying to tell me something, shouting over the sounds of what sounded like cattle getting mutilated. It's a controlled experience. They should be fine. Let's just keep pushing, I said, mostly for myself. I knew it was fake. It had to be fake. But everything was so well done, and I felt Kevin's previous words echo in my head. Just looks like there's something watching us. The words felt twisted, and I couldn't help but throw a paranoid glance over my shoulder. Sorry for your loss, Catherine. Deepest sympathies. My mind started to spiral. The incessant nagging that had persisted since we left finally came to a head and burst. I felt nauseous, like the world was suddenly spinning too fast. The lights were too bright and I couldn't see, and the speakers were too loud, and the nurse continued to saw at the limb until the bone broke free, and someone was grabbing my neck. I gasped and swatted wildly behind me, the back of my hand catching something. Ow, fuck, Cat, are you okay? Cat? Kevin recoiled from the hit, but shrugged it off quickly, reaching out to grab me by the shoulders. I shrugged him off, and then the contents of my stomach felt too vile to keep down, and I hunched over and vomited. I watched the heavy splash in slow motion, and when I looked up from the psychedelic bile, my eyes drifted to the stars. Someone was lurking in the stairwell, slowly coming up behind on all fours. A blue skull mask was strapped to their head, and clutched in their hand was a large meat cleaver. "We have to go," I shouted, barely standing. "What? Why? Just take it slow, Cat. I'll see if they can just pull us out," Bruce pleaded, but behind him the person was getting closer. "Come on, now," I said, forcing him with me. We bounded down the hall, my legs feeling distorted and wobbly against the strobe. I kept pushing, commanding them to obey, at least until we made it out of there. We passed the rows of doors and made it to the end of the hall, where we met the dead end of a closed wooden door. I tried the knob and it thankfully turned, swinging open into a new, equally dark corridor. I frantically slammed it behind me, just in time to see the man with the skull mask rushing toward us, cleaver raised. Kevin and I were breathing hard, looking around the room to see what was in store next. I couldn't shake the feeling of needing to leave, that something was terribly and unexplainably wrong. "Cat, are you okay?" "It's just a haunt. It's just a haunt. I'm sorry for your loss. I need to breathe," I told him, trying to focus and block the bad thoughts and the mysterious flowers and the scribbled malicious notes. "What the hell is this place? Where do we go now?" Kevin said, wiping the sweat from his brow as he looked around. The walls were decorated with LED lights, each plastered with a collection of X-ray films. Some of them were human, others not, each horribly disfigured with unnatural skeletal composition. We were in an examination room. I don't know," I said, looking around. I kept trying to catch my breath, but I felt myself unable to calm down. Thoughts of the skull mask and the cleaver plaguing me each time I closed my eyes. I tried to focus on something else. The old, dirty cabinets under the LED's glow, the cracked leather examination table, the rusted instruments on the counters. Kevin picked up on my distress and put a hand on my shoulder, the other fishing out his phone. "I knew this would be too much. Here, I'll try to call it off. I think I still have the number. Maybe they can put me through to someone in charge." The wall behind Kevin was opening, and a plethora of shapes spilled out quickly. Stripes, polka dots, bushy red hair, and face paint. Clowns. A large monolith of a man trudged behind him, a tower of rippling muscle barely contained by a black leather apron. He wore a steel mask that was spray-painted like a clown's makeup, two bloodshot eyes staring out from behind them. Clutched in his hands was a heavy sledgehammer. "The doctor will see you now," he said, his voice deep and gravelly as he addressed us, before turning to his henchmen. "Prep them for the breaking procedure." Wait, no, we need to get out of here," Kevin begged, but it was too late. The clowns swarmed us immediately, at least a dozen of them closing in while the taller one turned and left, disappearing back into the darkness from which he came. When they pulled Kevin away from me, he tried to struggle against them, but there were too many. When I saw them put the burlap sack over his face, the thought of being unable to see made me panic, and the world started to spin. Just as they were pulling the hood over me, I caught a glimpse of one of the clowns behind the group that restrained us. The metallic blue mask, the blood-stained cleaver. There was no way he followed us here. It wasn't possible. I refused to believe it. Everything went black, and in the fray of corralling limbs, I started to hyperventilate. Pulling, dragging, pushing to God knows where, I was ushered down tight hallways, turning left and right and left until I didn't know which was which. A dark vertigo set in, and I felt like I was on a merry-go-round, surrendering to the gravity, as they guided me where they wanted me to go. They laughed and cheered and honked horns and screamed, a maniacal cackle that deafened me as I traversed the unseen grounds before me. I thought of Kevin, Angie, Andre, and Bruce. It was just supposed to be a haunted house. Just something silly but fancier. I kept moving and moving until the laughter died down, the guiding hands withdrawing until I was walking on my own. The room felt colder, icier. My breath fogged under the hood, and by the time I didn't feel any hands at all, I heard the loud slam of a metal door, as well as the pull of a bar across the other side of it. I stood in silence, shivering. I heard a mechanical hum in the distance, followed by heavy breathing and hushed voices. I started to cry under the hood, feeling the invisible world around me crashing down. A loud voice called out to me, one that made me jump.
"That's enough. You may remove the hood now."
I recognized the gravelly voice, the masked man with a sledgehammer. I did as I was told. There was another throw of a switch, and the lights slowly blinked on. One by one, the fluorescents came to life, and the scene before me made less sense the more I could make it out. It wasn't just a single person ahead of me, but a group. I spotted the taller man first, the heavy hammer propped on his shoulder. There was a group of clowns hunched in front of him, trying to restrain a man garbed all in black. He looked up at me intently, his features hidden behind the plastic of a shiny blue skull mask. Blood leaked out from behind it and dripped on the floor in between every foggy breath he took.
"Do you know this man?"
the tall one asked. The man with the skull struggled momentarily, and the clowns held him in place. I don't understand, I said, hugging myself.
"We've paused the attraction. There seems to have been a casualty. One of our own. We have you and your friends on the books, but this one, this little rat, we don't know where he came from," he said, nudging the man with his boot. He squirmed and thrashed again, and this time one of the clowns punched him in the side of the head. "I don't know, I thought he was with you," I said, gesturing to him. Behind me, the door unlocked, and I heard 2 pairs of footsteps, a slow series of delicate scuffs along with the clop of high heels. "Here he is," a female voice said, and I looked to see the nurse who I had previously seen from the bloody part pile. Accompanying her was the old man in the pinstripe suit that had given us the waivers. Behind his stone-cold, sunken face was a look of genuine displeasure, a scowl that curled the longer he was in the room. The nurse cleared her throat before holding a vape rig to her mouth and hitting it. "Saw him following the group of 5, she said through a huffed cloud. "Thought something was up when Saf didn't signal they were coming up. He was creeping behind them the whole time, hiding in the shadows. I followed him. He was watching her specifically. Almost reached out and touched her a couple times. Looks like he was waiting for the right moment. He had this on him." She held out a blood-stained cleaver, and the old man took it in a shaking hand. He let out a mournful sigh before looking at the man they had restrained. "Luckily, we were able to reroute your friend through the tunnel so we could better deal with it. They're out now. Husband should be joining them any minute. We had him go through the mirrors," said Doc. The old man looked at me, his piercing stare silently searching. "Are you hurt? I apologize for the rough trip here. They're a scary bunch, but we value safety above all. Do you have any idea who this man might be?" the old man said, walking over to him. He pulled off the mask, revealing a beaten, angry individual. I didn't recognize him. Not even a little. But he recognized me. I briefly explained the past couple months. The cards, the flowers, the creepy illustrations. The old man listened, all the while staring the beaten man in the face. "You bitch. I almost had you. Almost. Your time will come, Catherine. Just when you think it's over, I'll be there." "I highly doubt that," the old man said, grabbing him by the face to make him look up at him. "Tell me, do you think if you screamed, anyone would hear you? Do you think when the maggots are festering in your brain, you'll be able to feel them wriggling around? When you get there, be sure to let me know." He let go and motioned to Doc, who promptly raised his hammer. The clowns pulled him up and twisted his arms, and through his shouts I could hear the sounds of bones breaking. Doc brought the hammer down on the back of his skull and all was silent. The clowns let the body fall, and the hammer came down a second time, this time reducing it to paste. I gasped and covered my mouth, unable to look away from the gore. "Mistress," he said, and the nurse joined him at his side. "The next group is waiting. In 10 minutes I'll open the doors to them. We need things up and running by then. How long do you think it'll take you to field dress this one? 6 minutes?" 4. You know that,
she teased, showing her belt, and the cutlery dangling above her garter. Carving knives of all shapes, along with the same bone saw she had earlier.
I suppose you're right,
he said, trailing off, before noticing me again. He cleared his throat like he had been lost in thought.
My apologies again. This man took one of my own, and that is an inexcusable offense. Sapphire was a good boy, worked for us for many years. Such an undeserved end. Your husband and friends are waiting for you on the outside, and you are free to go when you're ready.
He pointed to the wall on our left, to the mouth of a bright red tube. It was a slide, like one you'd see at a play place. You've got to be kidding.
I trust this will stay between us. That shouldn't be a problem, will it? After all, he never signed in. He was never here. Hell, even if you told someone, this isn't the first time we've had to dispose of waste. They'll never find him.
I was at a loss for words. I looked from the old man to the one called Mistress, who was already preparing the saw, to the clowns and the one known as Doc. They watched me silently, lurking behind the old man like a pack of hounds. In the end, I nodded, and said there wouldn't be a problem. I left them and headed toward the slide, ignoring the visceral sound of sawing bone. I climbed into the tube, trying my best to wipe my mind of what I saw. Just before I pushed off, the old man spoke a final time.
Oh, and miss, on the off chance you want to visit us again, feel free. It'll be on the house.
Without a word, I went down the slide and left them behind me. The world turned red, twisting and turning in a blur that somehow made me feel better. In the back of my mind, a storm was fizzling away, and by the time I reached the end of the slide, I was smiling. Bruce, Angie, Andre, and Kevin were waiting for me. We were in what looked like a tented enclosure, and I was surprised to see the rain had let up. Kevin took me in with open arms, apologizing again for coming out in the first place while Angie clapped in delight. The other three were borderline hysterical with excitement, each of them eager to share their own experience. Andre and Angie apparently had to navigate a store floor full of mannequins, while Bruce had to crawl through a muddy underground tunnel. Kevin seemed reluctant to explain his time in a hall full of mirrors and balloons, but I could tell he was a little excited. We agreed to catch up on the walk back to the car, as we were all eager to get out of there. Just as we were about to leave, a man stepped out of the shadows and blocked our path. There was a collective suck of breath as we waited for one last scare. When he stepped in the light, we could see he was dressed as a cowboy. His face a plaster of fake but remarkable rotting flesh. He tipped his hat to us, and extended both hands in pointed finger pistols.
Y'all come back now, you hear?
The ride home was loud and filled with awe from the extraction, each of our friends sharing their stories of the Nashville nightmare experience. The excitement died in time, and as we found ourselves riding in tired silence, Kevin leaned over and wrapped an arm around me. I know it was rough there for a moment, but do you feel a little better? He asked. Watching the trees pass, I felt myself ease and lean into him. Yes. Much better. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.